Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive author Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Well, Fridays come around fast, don't they, Matt? Here we are again.
Yeah.
It's Friday in the studio and recording the next episode of Thrive Deeper, episode 156. And we are moving out of the book of Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and into Galatians.
Yeah.
And we have set the ambitious target of getting through all 6 chapters of Galatians today.
It struck me as I've read through this book, Stu, again, how, a lot of the response that I've heard from people about this book is not particularly positive because the book has quite a combative flavour to it.
Yes.
However, one of the things that struck me about reading this again is how this expresses really the unique core element of the Christian faith. I mean, this book is gold in that sense, and I know it has a fairly combative sort of element to it because people are very prone to add, put lots of garb over this, and no, it couldn't really be that simple, could it?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing most Christians, well, for me anyway, we struggle with. It just seems too good that it's just grace and it doesn't come down to what I can do.
And life by the Spirit and the
right.
beautiful simplicity of the Christian life is being protected in this book. And it's something which historically has been really under attack in many, even from within the church. I mean, in the sort of late Middle Ages, this was the Luther's big thing, and Galatians was the book that Martin Luther, really focused on in terms of wanting to get the church back to the simple good news, the simple essence of the Christian faith. So this book is gold, and I think it's really worth understanding this book and moving through, understanding why Paul comes with a fairly combative attitude, because he's fiercely trying to protect something here, but really getting to the gist of what he's saying, which is what we're going to try and do today.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the combative thing is actually probably good. Well, it is for me, because I know the enemy constantly tries to tell us you're not good enough and God's grace isn't enough and you need to do better at this and this and that whole
and you need to do that as well. And no, you need this as well.
Exactly right. And so I think that kind of really addressing it strongly is helpful to us absolutely today. So just a bit of context. This was obviously written to Christians in the Roman province of Galatia, which was probably sort of the centre of modern Turkey today, if you want to get a rough idea of where it was. The capital of Galatia was Ancyra, spelt slightly different to how they spell the capital of Turkey today, but it's the same place basically. And it was probably Paul's earliest letter, most likely written here, and we see that written to the Galatians, which was predominantly a Gentile church. At the time, relatively new believers, probably only a matter of 2 or 3 years, relatively young Christians. And I think important to recognise too, by the time of Paul, probably there were as many, if not more, non-Jewish Christians than there were Jewish Christians. So this whole sense of the Gentiles was starting to become the predominant people in the Christian movement at the time, was starting to take its place.
And in this early time, this is something that now is increasingly the case. Of course, it started as a Jewish messianic movement. And this is this early stage of where now the Gentile church is starting to outgrow the Jewish church, and you get some of these issues. Interestingly, actually, Stu, this I think it's appropriate in a way that this letter does sum up the simple essence of the Christian faith, because to connect with what you said before about the date, really this is the earliest of the New Testament writings that we have. This is actually the first part of the New Testament that was written down in its current form. Now, of course, as Luke references the fact that lots of people wrote things down that Jesus said, so there were lots of records of the things that Jesus said. But in terms of a complete book of the New Testament. Wow. This is the earliest, really, to be written. Yeah.
Wow. There we go.
Yeah.
Very good. And Paul is responding to issues that have risen in the Galatian church after he's left, obviously. And this is where this Judaism, which we've talked about a little bit before towards the end of Corinthians there, where as Gentiles were becoming Christians, they were also being told that they needed to become Jews in a sense by these people who were saying they needed to follow the Mosaic laws and circumcision and all those sorts of things before they'd really be accepted as part of God's people. And so essentially they were saying Christianity is a bit of a subsect, I guess, of Judaism, and that's kind of what Paul's trying to address as we jump into this.
And it was quite a rigorously controlled lifestyle in terms of what you ate, the days that you observed, the various aspects of what you wore, the rites of circumcision, keeping the various festivals and days, and I mean, it really was and in a Gentile context, potentially quite disruptive as well.
Right.
Because it's okay if you're living in Israel and broadly speaking, life revolved, everyone observed the same holidays, and so that's kind of fine. And even in Jewish communities in the diaspora, I mean, they kind of live together, but now, now you're moving outside of that. And so it would have been quite disruptive. So it actually was a big deal,
right.
That they suddenly, what we have to observe all of these things again.
Yeah. But I reckon that also feeds our sense of, I need to do something to earn this. I think that whole sense of that I'm earning this, there's a price, that.
Well, this is the big topic in this book, really, isn't it? I mean, because the question that really is being asked here is, what is it that marks us out as belonging to the covenant people of God? Essentially, that's a very I express it that way because it's a very Jewish sort of question. What is it that marks me as a member of God's covenant people? And they would say, well, circumcision and keeping the law.
Yep.
Because that's what makes you look distinct. You keep these days. Your rhythm of life is different to other people. You look like other people. It's the covenant mark of circumcision and so forth. So, whereas Paul, wants to say, no, actually, it's something way deeper than that.
Yeah.
And it's something actually, because one of the issues I think with these Gentiles is they're used to a certain way of living, and I guess they're probably struggling. We've received Jesus. We've received Jesus by grace, not because we were good people, but and perhaps there was obviously the issue of them now learning to live this new kind of life.
Yes.
And so you get these, Jewish teachers that come in and say, well, there's easiest. I mean, the best way to do that is to live stringently observe the law,
the rules,
the rules, regulate your life by all these rules in all these different ways. But Paul's answer is actually better than that. He's actually going to say, no, that never worked in the first place. And actually the nature of the good news is that there is actually a better and deeper a way of living the life that God wants us to live that was always foretold throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah, it's amazing. From the inside out rather than from the outside in.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Let's jump in then. Obviously, Paul's pretty devastated that these new Galatians are embracing what he calls a different gospel.
Yeah, well, people... evidently what has happened is that Jewish teachers have come in because this is a burgeoning movement. It's a big thing that's happening here, right? Suddenly there's this growing interest in this sort of messianic Judaism, and so there are Jewish people who are, say, messianic Jews, but they've mistaken this message in some ways, and they're kind of, it almost seems like they're following Paul in some sense.
Yes.
But in whatever the case, because there were Jewish communities all over the place, so there are Jewish communities where these Gentile churches are. Yeah. Anyway, so they're coming in and saying, no, listen to it. Paul's off his rocker.
Yeah.
Don't listen to him.
That's not enough.
He's and he's not even one of the real apostles anyway.
Yeah.
listen to us. So the first thing that Paul has to do is, yet again, and we've seen this in Corinthians, haven't we? Yep. He actually has to defend his authority,
Yep.
And his apostleship.
Yep.
And so, he the first thing he wants to do is defend the fact that this gospel, he didn't just come up with this. This is actually a monumental change. Has actually kind of broken into history.
Yes.
In the actions of Jesus Christ, but also he wants to underscore the fact that he received this as a revelation from Jesus Christ,
directly from Christ. Exactly.
And so that's his point, because he goes,
and then he's commissioned to go and tell the Gentiles, about it.
Yeah, that's
which is what he's done.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And so a lot of in that first chapter is about him saying, I didn't just. This wasn't derived from any other. It wasn't even. This is even just garbled a second-hand message that I've got from the apostles in Jerusalem. No.
I got this directly.
Yeah, I got this directly, and actually, I went to them, and they, recognized the truth of this, and in fact, he points out, I've actually had to remind them of this, because the pressure on them as Jewish, as Jewish believers, to
which is what happened with Peter.
And so he points that out. So the pressure to, I guess,
conform to
the Jewish laws, and therefore, actually, by implication, to see Gentiles as kind of second class citizens.
Yeah.
There was a lot of pressure for that, and Paul points out how he had to say, no, guys, come on, this isn't the way it works. So after he does that, he then explains, and this is the what is, I think, so beautiful and valuable about this letter, is like how, coming back to the simple question, and the way that he puts, how is a person justified before God? How and of course his simple answer to that is that we're justified by faith. Now that's a very simple and well-known message if you're if you're an evangelical believer, in the Protestant tradition. We've heard that 1,000 times.
But what does that mean?
What does that actually mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's interesting when you hear something so much, you can actually slightly lose touch with the fact that you may actually not quite know,
not fully understand exactly
what that means.
So why don't you unpack that for us, Matt?
So to be justified is to basically be declared to be in a right relationship with God. It's a relational thing. You are justified in a right relation, and you're in a right relationship with God. Now, what Paul is basically saying is that what God is looking for, most of all, before any law observance or anything like that, what God is actually looking for, the nature of the relationship that he's looking for, is that which Jesus again illustrates. And I think the best way to illustrate this is to really use that, what Jesus said about being like little children, essentially.
Yep.
I think that's the best way, because God wants to be this is the relational element. God wants to be a father. He wants us to be his children. That's what it means to be in a right relationship with God, to be a child of God. Now, the essential nature of that child-parent relationship is trust. It is faith. Now, the Greek word pisteo is translated by 3 English words, actually, but there's only one Greek word. So we have the word belief. Now, when we think believe, we tend to think believing in a proposition, or I believe that something is the case.
Yes.
But it also the other English word that translated from pisteo is trust and faith. So trust, belief, faith. Now, essentially, they're all faith. Essentially, is trust and belief, but it's something much more holistic, something like allegiance. I mean, it's like a radical allegiance. It's not just believing that something is the case. If you believe that, and it includes that, but it's entrusting oneself to.
Believing in.
Yeah, it's believing in. Okay, so it's an intensely relational thing. And what Paul is saying here, the thing that God most wants, actually, is for you to trust him, right? Now, you even trust him actually to deal with your failures, to deal with your failure to keep the law. because we've all failed in that, and we all continually fail. And not only trusting God means trusting Him to redeem your failures, that is to make provision for your forgiveness, which He's done through Jesus Christ, but also to trust God to help you and empower you to live the life that you're meant to be living. Not just on it's not based on, your achievement in keeping the law. It's actually, He's going to go on to talk about keeping in step with the Spirit.
Yeah.
So it's trust all the way.
Yes.
It's trust all the way, whether it's trusting in God to make up your failures through the atoning work of Jesus Christ.
Yep.
Or to empower you to live this new. All of that is trust.
Yes.
So it's because one of the questions that people bring up is, well, does that, and even Paul alludes to this himself, does that mean then? So we just have to, if we believe in Jesus, it doesn't matter then how we live.
Yeah, that's right. I can go do whatever I want.
Yeah, you can do whatever. But I believe in Jesus. I've got my ticket.
Yeah.
I've got my ticket that says, no, I'm in a right relationship with God despite what I do, and then and I go to heaven and all. The ticket to heaven kind of idea.
Insurance policy thing.
There's an aspect of that is right, that we are declared right with God despite what we've done and, in fact, what we do. The mistake there is misunderstanding actually what belief, what pisteo, what faith actually is.
Yeah.
Faith is being entrusted to God, trusting. It's that allegiance. It's that keeping in step with the Spirit.
Yeah.
Of course we fail.
Yes.
But when we fail, there's faith to be exercised. Get up, trust God. Not only to cover your failures, for forgiveness, but also to empower you to live this life. So that's essentially, that's why being right with God, just trust me. God says, you just trust me, and you'll be in the right space, right? You'll be, in the right in that sense.
Yep. Righteous.
Yeah, that's right. Righteous. So to be righteous is essentially to be right where God wants you, and that's in that place of trust, complete trust.
Yeah.
And part of that trust actually is empowered by the fact that we have completely failed, and therefore we need to actually trust rather than rest back on our own achievements in keeping the law, that we actually need to trust God for our salvation. And it's also the recognition that we cannot actually in and of ourselves live up to be the people that God wants us to be.
Right.
And so we have to trust God to empower us and lead us by His Spirit. And that is a daily thing of trusting and keeping in step with the Spirit. So that's the key thing that he argues for here. Now, the way that he's going to do this is to actually point out that this was always the case.
Yeah.
This actually isn't some new thing. Now, this is important because I feel that at times some Christians tend to think, well, the Old Testament, that was all about law, and the New Testament's all about grace. Then they kept the law, and that's how they were, considered righteous then, but now it's by grace.
Yeah.
No. And this is Paul both in Romans and in Galatians points out, no, it was always the case that we were made right by faith.
Yeah.
It was always faith that God wanted. And he points this out, of course, both here and in the book of Romans by using Abraham as the example. God said, all right, or even though everyone was in the same boat, everyone was as bad as each other, God said to Abraham, leave talk about the act of faith initially, leave that whole lifestyle behind and step into this promise. And he did.
Yeah.
And he was justified.
Yeah.
He was right. He was in exactly the right space.
He trusted God and he stepped out and did what God
because he was in that place of trust, right?
Yeah. And using the word trust, and this might be a bit of a long stretch of the bow, but even right back to the garden, are we going to trust that what God says is true?
Yeah.
Or are we going to not trust that and decide to take things into our own hands?
Yeah. It was trust, right back there. Yeah. And you can see, and one of the things I love about the story of Abraham, and by extension, love that Paul continually refers to Abraham as a demonstration of faith is because Abraham's faith was very faltering.
Yes.
So he is the father of faith, and yet, the classic example is the Hagar situation. It's interesting because he actually uses the Hagar incident as a bit of a allegory here. But, God said, I'm going to give you offspring, and Abraham and Sarah... But we need to actually make it happen.
Well, they were, getting on.
They were getting old. So
Sarah laughed, in reality.
Yeah. So God's saying, "Hey, listen, trust me. I'm going to give you offspring. I said I would, and I am going to. And so the faltering of their faith was, we'll just make it happen.
We better help God out.
And that was the whole handmaid given to Abraham, and hey, that was Hagar, and then Ishmael was born, and God said, no, don't. I said I would do it. You've just got to trust me. That's, don't try to make it happen yourself. Yeah. So that was an important lesson, and in some ways encouraging that, that there was a faltering, it wasn't a perfect faith. Yeah. I was looking for a perfect faith, but he's looking for faith nevertheless, and that's what puts us in the right space.
And if you bring that forward even to the Exodus, which is really the first indication of, what was to come with Jesus, is like they had to trust that when they painted the blood over the doorposts, that the eldest, would be spared. And that was an element of trust and faith and believing.
Yeah.
We need to do this so that we can be, be safe as we leave the bondage of Egypt.
Yeah. And he actually points out that they became Christians not by what they did, or it was by the Spirit of God that they were actually transformed in the first place. So he says, why go backwards?
He even says, I was back there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and I've become one of you.
Yeah,
and now you're trying to become one of me.
Yeah. You're trying to become what I was.
Yeah.
That's right. So it just doesn't make sense. Yeah. And so he's so concerned with this idea of freedom, that we've been freed from the condemnation of the law, but we've also been freed, in a sense, from a law-centered way of living. This is an interesting. It's an interesting topic. I have a lot of conversations about this sort of thing, because our natural go-to, I think, as Christians, is, well, what are the rules? Just tell me the rules. And it's not that God's law is not valid. You know what I mean? Like, the commandments, and like, they're still good. I mean, Paul says as much. They're a guide, right? Yeah. They're a guide. Yeah. Okay. But they don't actually
justify us.
Yeah, they don't make you. They actually, in a sense, show up.
They condemn us. Really.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
They show up where we're wrong.
Yeah.
But there's no. They don't empower us to live the way, like just keeping the rules. Like, I mean, it's like if I said, Stu, just give me a list of 20 rules for me to have the perfect marriage, right? And I just robotically put those. I mean, actually, probably could do some good, but anyway. But if I just robotically put those, it actually is not, because we're talking about something relational, okay? Yeah. And it's not just about robotically keeping rules. It's about forming a certain kind of heart, a certain kind of love, a certain kind of trust, right? So the rules-based thing is problematic from that point of view. It's also problematic in that it doesn't actually allow us to live a rule-based living. And again, this is not dismissing the law in any way, because the law holds principles for life that endure. Let me just underscore that.
Yeah.
There are principles. There is a way to live that's right and a way to live that's wrong. Okay, but it's actually even deeper than that. It's deeper than just the behaviors. In a sense, the behavior is just the symptom. What in fact Paul refers to as the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's as much our motives.
It's
about our behaviour.
That's right. It's as much our motives. And I think then the problem with just rigid laws, and this was of course a problem, increasingly a problem in the first century with Jews living amongst Gentiles all over the place, is that so many complexities to life, and a rule-based living is not going to help you navigate the very complex situations with layer upon layer of complexity, and you're thinking, well, what do I do in this situation? And that is where where that deeper sense of what does it look like in this situation
to be led
for me
by the Spirit.
to be led by the Spirit. What is God calling me to be and do in this situation? And it doesn't make the law subjective. It doesn't make it relative in that sense. It doesn't do away with the principles, but it does allow us to navigate through the complexities of life, which we see in Jesus' life as well. I mean, he was constantly, people were bringing up objections. You can't do that because that's against the law. Can't do that. That's against the... He's saying, no.
This is
but
on the Sabbath.
I'm actually fulfilling the principle of the law.
Exactly. Well, that example where he was, challenged for doing something on the Sabbath, and he said, but this, what I'm doing is more important than the fact that this is a day.
That's right.
In the law of rest.
That's right. And one of the big ones, of course, is going to the houses of sinners and tax collectors. And man, it's really looked like he was getting his hands dirty there. But he said, listen, the whole point of this is God has called me to reach out to the lost. And in fact, you too, right?
Yeah.
So you're really gonna have to be prepared to form the right heart. And because you're going to get your hands dirty in one sense, so this rigid rule-based living where I've got to keep myself immaculate and untainted by the world,
which of course we can't do.
It's not going to work because this movement now is moving into a missional context, and in fact, historians have pointed out that this is the key thing. When even secular historians who ask the question, what is it that caused this movement? When Judaism had been around, and there were lots of Greek and Roman people who were interested in Judaism. There was lots of interest in it, actually. You have all of this talk in the New Testament about sort of God-fearing Gentiles, because they were really fascinated with this monotheism, and there was a lot that was attractive about it, but it could not move outside of those boundaries because it was so rigid, and it was, and historians recognize that actually it was these teachings about just bringing it down to this core simple message of being made right with God through faith, trust God, and then living by the Spirit. That wasn't doing away with the law. It was wanting to fulfill the law in a that full inward sense, but that simplifying of things is actually what enabled this movement to become supple enough, as it were, to actually incarnate itself into all different cultures, and move way outside Judaism because of its beautiful simplicity. And one of the things that, and this is, I think, what has struck me, and again, as I read this letter, is how this contrasts from even not only Judaism but all other religious systems. Actually, I have read a lot of other religious literature with a lot of interest. I find religions interesting because of the way that they express that universal kind of human propensity, and the Paul says, although they knew God and so forth,
eternity in their hearts,
eternity in their hearts, and there is a lot of truth, therefore, in a lot of these other religions, but it's human beings striving to make themselves somehow acceptable to this God that they intuitively feel in whatever form that they feel is there, and it's so complicated. And it's based on, it's so achievement based.
But it almost needs to be before they feel like they've paid the price. In a sense, because they feel they need to pay the price. If I haven't paid a price, it can't be real. I need to do something. And so they're all driven by this. This is what you need to do.
That's right.
To pay the price.
Because it's achievement driven, therefore it separates sort of the gurus from the ordinary. It creates this separation, because if it's about achievement, that guy, he's really, and this is the way that it was with with first century Judaism. You had the Pharisees, everyone looked up to them, and kind of despaired, actually. It's like, there's no way. I mean, these guys memorized the whole Bible. They lived to the most intricate details of the law. Everyone else just despaired,
And I actually think think today that's a big chunk of what the enemy uses to try to discourage us by telling us, oh, you haven't been living as you should have been, or you haven't done this, and you should be doing that, and you should be, and you should be, and you should be.
Yeah.
Because we know we can't.
Yeah.
And that's where he uses the lever to get in and kind of say, grace isn't actually enough, and faith in Jesus isn't enough. You also need to be doing
and
this.
That's right, because a lot of spiritual paralysis, what I would refer to as spiritual paralysis, is basically people giving up.
Yes.
I just despair. I just can't do that.
Yep.
Well, actually, that's right.
You can't.
You actually can't. Yeah. And that actually could be the beginning of your most important moment of truth.
Yes.
Because actually what God is saying to you, I need you to trust me. We're going to just, first of all, trust me that you are accepted despite your complete failure. God sees that. But he says, I paid for that. I paid for you. Now, just trust me. Let me lead you one step at a time. And you're going to stumble and you're going to fall. Yeah. But it's that trusting life that he's looking for, as he is going to strip away those things that drag you down, and he is going to form a new way of seeing and feeling, and it's really core. It's really deep sort of stuff. So so until that happens, until that new way of seeing and feeling and that real inward stuff happens, of course you're going to continually fail, morally and spiritually. Yeah. And so we really. And I think the more I've gone on, the more years down the road in this Christian life, the more dependent I feel on God to enable me actually to live. Because, and actually part of that is seeing what God actually is doing. It's like, wow, God, you are actually doing everything. You are actually doing everything that is required to strip this away from me, to speak to me, to bring the right people into my life, wow, like God is actually doing all of that. All I've got to do is respond.
Exactly.
Is not kick and scream and fight and run the other way. Yeah. That's, that's not much, but it is significant, and it's called faith.
Yeah. Step into what God's already doing in your life and in the lives of people around you. So, I guess the question here is, and Paul kind of asks us, if the law could save us, do we really think God would have sent his only son to die on a cross? I mean,
exactly.
Why would he have done that if the law could actually save us?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think Paul's kind of saying, beware of people who suggest to you that you need Jesus plus.
Yep.
We don't. We need faith in Jesus, as you've said. And I mean, a great example of that is the criminal on the cross next to Jesus, who simply says, I trust who, in other words, he basically says, I trust who you are, remember me. And Jesus says, that's it. Yeah. You'll be with me, Exactly. He didn't do any of the other stuff that sometimes Christians can put on us that we need to be doing if we're going to make it.
Oh, man. Talk about a speck of faith.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's dying on a cross.
Yeah, all he says, because he just thinks, I mean, can you imagine? Because he would have been like a revolutionary.
Yep.
That's why he would have gone there thinking, I'm a martyr. He would have had this dreadful realization that the other guy probably wasn't willing to face.
Yeah.
I've got it completely wrong.
Yeah.
Actually, this is the truth. This person is the truth next to me. And yet the trust, enough trust just to say, Lord, please remember me.
And to rebuke the other guy, really.
Yeah. What are you doing?
This guy's done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
And then
that's all he does.
That's
and
it.
Jesus said, that'll do.
That'll do.
Just that speck of trust gives him, give me one little finger and I will pull you out. I will pull your whole being with that one little fingernail. Not even, really, there's
Absolutely.
just nothing there in terms of, so people say, I'm not sure if I have enough faith. Just exercise what faith you have. Because that's what the thief on the cross did. Yeah. It's actually so beautiful. I mean, it's so beautifully simple that I think it's the sheer simplicity of it that is the struggle.
Absolutely.
For a lot of people, because we perpetually want to make things more complex than they actually are. Because of course we're complex. We are these tied up balls. There are so many layers of complexity in us.
Well, I think it also comes back to our sense of we want to be in control of our own lives.
Yeah.
And so me doing this should earn me that.
Yeah.
Is just the whole brokenness of human nature. It's the same thing that happened right at the garden all the way through. It's like, no, I don't like the fact that I'm completely dependent on my faith in what Jesus has done, there's nothing I can do. No, I don't like that. In a sense, I want to be able to do something that earns this or whatever.
Yeah, that's right.
It's about the control thing again.
And this is why Paul is so upset about this. Because this explosive thing that has exploded into their midst and transformed their lives, the power, the sheer power of that, right? That is the reason that they're there in the first place. And now they're kind of turning away from that. They're wanting to make it complex, and which is going to grind the whole thing to a halt, actually. And I tell you, when you look at the Christian movement, I mean, when this has happened, it becomes overly complex. That's when it does grind to a halt. And so he's so upset about this. I mean, in fact, he says, if anyone preaches a different gospel other than the one I'd let him be eternally accursed. I mean,
he says it twice, actually,
man,
to make sure.
Yeah, he said this is really serious because nothing is more important than the simple truth of this good news that all you need to do is entrust yourself to Jesus Christ. Keep in step with the Spirit, which is also a consequent act of trust. That's all you need to do, actually. And that actually will enable you to live a life that essentially fulfills the requirements of the law, which he says towards the end, he says, listen, the whole law is summed up in love your neighbor as yourself.
Yes.
But again, it's the Spirit of God that's going to enable you actually to do that.
Yeah, that's right. The Holy Spirit basically replaces our old human nature and puts the fruit of the Spirit into our lives, and that enables us to live the way that God would have us live. And it doesn't mean we're going to get it right. Yeah,
well, in a sense, I'd probably, rather than say replace, I think I would say is set over and against in some. I mean, again, you can't be scientific about this, and language fails. Yeah. But because there is throughout Paul's writings this sense that the old nature is kind of there, but it's something that the new nature puts to death. It's like it keeps in submission. So there he talks about putting to death the old man, and as a continuous thing. Yeah. And I mean that's important because that's the act of trust. There's always the choice. It's like throughout this life, we continually have that choice between the two trees in the garden. Yep. Am I going to eat from this tree, or am I going to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or am I going to eat from the tree of life? And the way of avoiding the one is to eat from the other. So this is what Paul's continually pointing.
So to stay in step with the Spirit, it does require us to lean into our relationship with God, and to be seeking to grow in that, because that's going to make it easier for us in those day-to-day decisions to stay in step with what the Spirit is asking of us, or how He's directing us.
That's right. So. And I love the imagery there of keeping in step with the Spirit, because when you're walking, it's one step at a time. Because I think we have a tendency to get overwhelmed by all of the things that we need to be in it, and it's like no, just work with what God is doing and saying now. Work with the challenge that faces you now. I think if we have too bigger sort of ideals, and I think this is probably one of the problems that Jesus confronts in the Pharisees, is that they're wanting to get sort of everything right. They actually miss the point. Yeah, it's like, here's a crippled man. He needs healing. Yeah. Like, they somehow lost touch with that, because in that moment, that's what God was wanting to do. But they've got such all of these complex rules that actually distract them from that simple moment, that simple thing that God is wanting to do there and then. And so this is the beauty of this step-by-step walking by faith, is that we're not required to get there all in one leap. It's just, what's the next step for you? What is God challenging you with now? It'll be one small increment. Trust looks like just trust Him with that. If you're feeling, stressed by something, or just, what does God want? He's saying, trust me with this, actually, because the most important thing in this situation is actually not resolving that situation. It's actually trusting me. In this situation, what does that look like? What does it look like to listen and take whatever challenge God is putting before you right now? That's what trust means. It's one step at a time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all our resources and much more at our website thrivetoday.tv. We really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading as we go through the Bible with Thrive. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper and thrive.